let's talk about some dark romances. It feels like it's been a hot minute since I've done a dark romance recommendation video, and that's really my subgenre. Despite the fact that I'm trying to branch out and try different things, my one true love in the smut category will always be dark romance. And I have a slew of new ones that I want to tell you about, most of which I thoroughly recommend and love, but I do want to touch on maybe a couple that aren't exactly my favorite, but I think someone else could really enjoy, so let's get into it. We're going to start off with a couple that I think you probably have heard about that I just want to kind of like throw my hat in to be like, yes, these are good. I co-sign this. It is a good book that is worth your time. First, let's start off with American Queen series by Simone. I loved her Thornchapel series just like so much. I also really enjoyed this series. This is about the President of the United States, his Vice President, as well as the woman they're both interested in. Now this is a true love triangle. They all have an interest in each other, and I just love the dynamic between them, especially the President of the United States. He gives off major daddy dom vibes, and like, it's so good. Every once in a while I mention like the actor that I picture in these roles, and this is Henry Cavill all the way. The interpersonal drama and politics of it all gets a little complicated. Like, there's so much melodrama in this series. I liked this first book more than the sequel. I haven't read the third book in the series yet, but this first one was totally worth it to me. I really enjoyed the dynamic. Once you get all three of them together, it's just fire. The other popular one that I want to talk about quickly and just throw my agreement in there is Den of Vipers by K.A. Knight. Now, this is a big chunky bitch, and a lot of people might not like it for that reason, because honestly there is not a massive amount of plot in here. Like, I heard everyone's major complaint, people who had never picked up smutty books before, say that once they picked this up they were like, this is just sex scene after sex scene. Whereas I was like, I don't know, there could be more. There could be more sex scenes. Even though there is a lot, it's just that it doesn't really start until like the 30% mark, which is normal for a book. But when the book is 600 pages, 30% is quite a lot of pages without sex. Regardless, this is a reverse harem, mafia gang type romance. Our main character, Roxy, gets basically bought by this gang because her father reneges on whatever deal they had. She's not exactly thrilled about being taken hostage by these guys, and she basically makes their life a living hell because they really didn't know just who they were fucking with when they brought her into their house. I really enjoy reverse harems, especially ones where the guys are already friends and already have a dynamic together in this found family aspect, and then you add in the girl that they all fall for. I love it. And then when that girl is kind of a bitch, I'm like, yes, even better, give it to me. We have the leader, whose name is Ryder, who's like the strong, brooding one. Kenzo, who's kind of the flirt. He's the more easygoing one, and he's the brother to Ryder. We have Garrett, who's the damaged one emotionally because he got fucked over by an ex. He's the one who has like a traumatic past. They all have traumatic pasts, but his is the one that affects him the most. And then we have Diesel, who's just like the batshit crazy one, and he's probably my favorite because the dynamic between him and Roxy is just so much fun. There are also some really weird sex scenes. I will never forget the first sex scene between her and Diesel as long as I live because it was unique. Let's put it that way. But it was also funny, and that's probably not what they were going for. But honestly, I will take a funny, ridiculous sex scene over a boring, mediocre one any day. Those two are 100% worth the hype. Now, for one that maybe you haven't heard of, I want to talk about Dark Soul by Aleksandr Voinov. This was a hidden gem. I talked about this during my mid-year freakout book tag because it is the most surprising book I've picked up. I had no idea what to expect going into this. I had never heard anyone talk about it, and this is a male-male mafia romance involving this head honcho boss of his mafia family and this freelancer assassin. There's an age gap there. The assassin is the younger one, and these books are almost like connected short stories. We are always following these two characters, but the scenes are definitely a little bit loose. They're not directly after each other. It definitely doesn't flow like a regular book would. They're just kind of showing us some of the bigger moments in their relationship. To pick this up, and be immediately introduced to a non-consensual gunplay scene. Be Still My Beating Heart. It was so incredibly hot. Now you quickly learn that our main character, the mafia boss, he's not quite like out of the closet as bisexual. There's definitely a lot of homophobia in the book, not from the author, but just like in this world that the characters live in. But I feel like the author balances it well with the younger character because he is just completely himself. He has no qualms about who he is and about his sexualities and the desires he has. So that I do really like seeing. And it's interesting to watch an older character like kind of come to terms with his sexuality. We also quickly find out that the assassin is like a pain slut, and I love that too. I read and really enjoyed Deliver from Pam Godwin, which was another example of a romance with a guy who's a pain slut, and just, I really enjoy that trope because it's not something we get to see as often. I will say that volume 2 has some stuff in it that I don't love, which I am going to mention here because I just feel like it's something you should know going in. I'm not super in love with surprise incest, and it just seems to keep showing up in my books. I don't know why. This is not the surprise I asked for, but if it's something you're into, I definitely have recommendations for you because I just keep coming across them, and this is one of them. If you don't like it, I would skip volume 2. Because the stories are rather short, I just kind of like pushed my way through that, and overall, I love the first volume of this so much that I'm definitely going to reread it. I wish I could buy it physically, but unfortunately, the physical version is only in Italian. I just realized I only told you about the first scene in volume 1. The second scene is just as hot. There's a water play scene that, when I say water play, I mean waterboarding, not water sports. Once again, nothing wrong with that, not for me. But this waterboarding scene, I just never knew I'd find that hot, and yet here we are. Aleksandr Voinov definitely pushes the limits on things that are taboo, but I kind of love that. Another thing that was just quick and good and hot was The Dare by Harley Laroux. Very short novella. It's about two people who end up at this party together. They are very opposites on the social spectrum of things. She was the queen bee in high school. He was kind of an outcast. Now their roles are reversed now that they're older and they see each other at a party. They kind of have this like hatred towards each other while also being kind of flirty. And they play beer pong, making a bet that whoever loses gets to be like the slave for the other one for the night. This has a little bit of a humiliation kink to it, and that's something I really want to read more of because it's something I very much enjoy. This is one of those things that like, once I read it, I immediately knew that I have to read more from this author's work. I'm always impressed when an author can write something short but effective and memorable. Speaking of novellas, another good one is An Illicit Seduction by Chencia C. Higgens. I read this for a paranormal video I have coming out. This was a lot different than what I was expecting, but really good. Like I mentioned, this has a paranormal edge to it, but basically it is about this girl who ends up sleeping with, I believe it's her coworker slash really good like friend of hers. She kind of doesn't want to, and yet she just feels like this pull towards him. So I consider it a dark romance because of the fact that she just like doesn't have full control over her actions. And in a way, neither does he. I don't want to say too much because it is no novella and it is so short. It had really good dirty talk, and it was just a unique read that I wasn't expecting. The next one I might have mentioned before in a video, but it still just does not have enough love, and that is The Devil by Ashley Jade. This is a male-male-female romance. Once again, a true love triangle. They all have interest and they all have different experiences with each other. It's hard to explain this one fully because there are different timelines going on. There's the past and the present. The present, it revolves around our main female character and her interactions with her stepdad. Her mother's just died and now she has this flirtation going on with her stepdad. Then there's the past storyline that has to do with these two guys who are going to school together, and the stepdad is one of those guys. I could not give two shits about the present day storyline. The main character is kind of annoying, but that past storyline between the two guys was so good and like scandalous in a way. I always compare it to Cruel Intentions in my mind, because they just had this weird back and forth with each other where it was antagonistic but sexual. Like, they very clearly just had this thick sexual tension there, and there was something so addictive about this book. I love the first one so much more than the second one, personally, because I feel like the second one revolves more around the present day storyline when the one guy comes back into the life of this main female character and the stepdad. But that past storyline where there's also a teacher that they hook up with, and it has some hot threesomes. It's all good. This might just become me recommending a bunch of reverse harems, because apparently that is my shit. If you've never picked one up, I would definitely recommend at least giving it a shot. One woman who writes a lot of reverse harems that I like is CM Stunich. And so let me recommend you this time Fuckboy Psychos. Yes, that is a ridiculous name, I know, but regardless, it's one of my favorite series by her. I have tried out like a handful of her series. I feel like her Prescott Boys series got a little bit more attention, whereas the rest of her series don't seem to get as much love. And if you like the Prescott Boys series, this one takes place at that same school. It actually takes place before the Prescott High series does. It involves a bunch of bad boys who all fall in love with the same badass chick. There's a lot to do with the local racetrack. There's some sort of city corruption storyline going on. There's one really ridiculous storyline that I don't love so much. But overall, I just find this series so addictive and easy to read and fun and silly and hot. I love Kellen Bones and Alexi Grove. She definitely has a thing for boys who don't like being touched, except for by the love interest, and they have to like fight their urges. It's interesting. It's an interesting dynamic. Another one you've probably heard of that is also a reverse harem that I just want to say that I love is The Lady at Rooksgrave Manor by Kathryn. This is about a brothel that caters to the paranormal beings of the world. Our main character ends up getting hired at the brothel and having a harem of her own. This has this like Victorian Gothic sort of feel to it. Some of the characters that we get introduced to are so different than the normal paranormal beings I feel like we normally see. There's one in here that is basically Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. There's a vampire, so that one's kind of the normal one. There's a stone statue, like a golem. There's a sphinx who shapeshifts, as well as a guy who's like basically a ghost, I guess. He's been cursed to be invisible, and he can take a corporal form, but he has to really struggle hard to do that. It's just such a unique mix of characters. I just love this main character who kind of finds her way throughout the book to being okay with her sexual desires. She basically starts the book being judged for how sexual she is, how much she enjoys sex, and by the end of the book she's fully embraced it, and I support that message. If you are looking for a plot, it is nowhere to be found, but if you're like me and just want a bunch of sex scenes back to back, pick this one up. Another absolute fave that I just feel like I need to rave about again is The Unrequited by Saffron and Kent. Saffron and Kent in general, if you just pick up any of her books, you are likely to have a good time. But personally, this is my favorite of the three I've read. Now this one is about our main character who has a tendency to get obsessive about the guys that she likes. Even if it's a guy she barely knows, she will find a way to bust into their life, whether they want her there or not. First of all, it's kind of refreshing to see a female act that way, because I feel like in most dark romances, it's always the guy who is like stalking the girl and not leaving her alone. So it's a nice role reversal. The guy she gets obsessed with in this book is her teacher, her slightly older teacher. What I really loved about this book is, first of all, his backstory and his point of view was actually complex. He had problems that felt realistic and authentic, and he was kind of an asshole to her, but he also had legitimate reasons to be an asshole to her. There are certain things that I feel like Saffron and Kent is really good at. One of them is writing dynamics where it feels like nobody's necessarily overtly in the wrong. It feels like they both have their own separate lives and their own separate problems that conflict with each other. I also think she's really good at writing mental health problems. That seems to be kind of a thorough line throughout her books. And she writes them in a way where it's never just magically solved by finding the right person, the love of your life. You're not just suddenly cured, which I very much appreciate because unfortunately that happens way too often. The dynamic between them was so combative while also being addicting, while also being a little taboo and obsessive, and it was just so much fun. I frequently think about this book even though I haven't read it for like 2 years. It just always comes back to my mind because this is one of my favorite student-teacher romances. I feel like they can often go so wrong. It helps that this one was set in college, I will say. This teacher was definitely pretentious because he's like a failed writer, basically. He had like one hit book and then just like had to give up his career or something. It feels like we're meeting his character at a particularly hard time in his life. He's really being tugged between several different choices and directions in his life, and it's refreshing to see a character that I'm actually interested in as a person. I feel like this dynamic too especially works well because while he is being a complete asshole to her, she is choosing to be around him. She has autonomy in a way that not a lot of main characters do in these bully-ish type romances. She is going out of her way to be in his path. She's going out of her way to subject herself to his insults. And I feel like that makes a huge difference because it's not just him finding her and treating her like shit. Highly recommend this one if you like student-teacher romances. Also recommend Dreams of 18 by Saffron, but not for student-teacher, just for age gap in general. If you're an age gap girly, I think Saffron is a good author for you. And Saffron is especially good at writing hot sex scenes. I have 2 more books I want to talk about, and they are both books that aren't necessarily my absolute favorites, but I want to recommend and talk about them here anyway. Because even if they aren't my favorites, that doesn't mean nobody else is going to like them. And I do think they both have something to recommend to people who like dark romance. The first one is Wicked Ways by Cari Silverwood. Now, I have already gone on and on about how much I love Take Me, Break Me. This book was so good and is what introduced me to this author's work. It's a pretty short read, and there are definitely some kinky scenes in here that I haven't seen anywhere else. So I wanted to try something else by her, and so I ended up grabbing Wicked Ways. Which basically, to me, if you have ever seen this first season of Jessica Jones, this feels like Jessica Jones fanfic between her and Kilgrave. I think that's his name. He's played by David Tennant. Basically, he's a mesmer, or like he's able to control people's minds, and you can imagine the ways that goes sexually. It was relentless in how bleak it was. This woman ends up being controlled by this mesmer, and he basically keeps her at his house to do whatever things he wants with her. He also has a party and invites other people. It's a lot. He eventually dumps her on the side of the road and tells her to go kill herself. And that's just where we start off. He does get her back later and do more bleak things to her. It was an interesting time. And he's not even the main, can I even say love interest? There is no love here. She is not attracted to this man in any way. That's just like her backstory. But there are 2 other men in the story that she might have relationships with down the line. I don't even know how to explain this book. I've only read the first book. There are more, and I do plan on reading them because I truly don't know where this series is going, and that's not something I can say about a lot of romances, smutty books, any books that I pick up, is usually you can kind of understand where things are going based on other things you've read. With this, I don't know. She has one guy that she knows and has been on dates with at the coffee shop who's just like a gigantic sweetheart and tries to take care of her. And then there's another guy who is also a mesmer, but he goes out of his way to try and take down ones who are abusing their power, and he meets her and tries to get her to work with him to take this guy down. But he's also kind of shifty as well. Like, he also has some weird dark past. If any of that sounds interesting to you, it's definitely unique. The other one I wanted to mention was Haunting Adeline by H.T. Carlton. I didn't love this personally because I think it's way too bloated. There are massive chunks of this book that could be removed, and I feel like the book would be better for it. This is definitely a stalking romance. This girl inherits her grandmother's old house, and she moves in and creepy goings-on start happening. Someone keeps leaving roses for her and stuff, so she knows that somebody is stalking her and it scares the crap out of her. There's also a storyline going on where she's reading the letters from her grandmother in the past where she's also being stalked, or it's her great-grandmother, I believe. And then eventually we get to the stalker's point of view, and he has his own story as well. I wish I could remove everything else except for the stalker storyline. The stalker storyline between these two characters was pretty good. It had a very unique feeling to it because at the beginning it almost feels like the house is actually haunted. And I like that because I've never really read a smutty book that had that vibe. And then when you finally do get introduced to the stalker, the words that come out of his mouth especially are pretty hot. Unfortunately, I did not like the other aspects of the book, and this thing is like 500 to 600 pages. I do think it is a book a lot of people have really liked. It just wasn't my favorite because of all the excess. Especially once you get involved in his storyline, which I believe is most of the second book. His storyline is over the top and a bit ridiculous, but their dynamic is really good. Those are some of the dark romances that I've been loving and would absolutely recommend to fellow dark romance lovers. I hope you find something to enjoy here. I hope you like this video, and I hope you'll come back in soon.